Welcome back, guys, to an OmniFocus Fitness video. Today we're going to be discussing a unique topic that I'm sure, well, I guess I'm not sure, but I have a pretty good idea that probably no one really talks about it. And it is rather morbid because we are going to be talking about the prevalence of death. I listen to too much metalcore. Anyways, so we're going to be talking about the prevalence of death in exercise. And the way this video is going to work is we're going to break it up into different sections. We're going to break it up between aerobic, so cardiovascular exercise, and then we're going to talk a little bit about an explanation for why the results for the studies that I looked at, why the results were the way that they were, and then we're going to talk about anaerobic exercise or strength training and the very few studies that were done on that. We will also be explaining why those results turned out the way that they did. So yes, I am going to be giving you exact numbers. I am going to be giving you exact percentages. We don't mess around here. We don't mess around at OmniFocus. We're not talking about, well, your risk of death is very low. That doesn't help anyone, okay? Alright, I'm too excited. Let's do it. Alright, let's move on. Oh, one more thing. If you're new to this channel, there is a menu system so you can skip around through the video in the description box as well as at the end of this introduction. And of course, all my sources are linked in the article, which also offers more information that I'm going to be talking about in this video. Again, all sources linked below in the article. Okay, I think I've covered all my bases. I think we can move on. All right, let's do it. Alrighty, first one. What is the risk of death in aerobic cardiovascular exercise? So if you go out there and you're running and you're jogging and you're biking and you're kayaking and anything that's going to be long duration, you're going to be doing for a longer period of time, so not weight training, not doing sprints, nothing like that. In that case, then that would be aerobic exercise, so you can continuously do it because you're using your aerobic metabolism. That's where I'll leave that. Okay, so what's the risk? What is the risk? Well, when it comes to athletes, so we are talking about, usually we would consider that highly fit individuals, the risk of death is 1 in 133,000 for men. Let's hammer that through, okay? So 1 in 133,000 for men. In women, however, the risk is even smaller than that, okay? The risk is 1 in 769,000. So the risk is like 5, 6, 7 times lower for women when it comes to cardiovascular exercise, or at least athletic women, in comparison to men, and we will discuss a little bit of why that is in the next section. Now, that's interesting, I think, because every once in a while you hear in the news about some major athlete or whatever just dropping dead on, let's say, a basketball court or on the soccer field or things like that, and I just want to hammer home that is so incredibly rare, and that those statistics that I'm giving you are actual from peer-reviewed research that have looked into this, have looked into all the different cases, have looked into actually straining the body, actually controlled research, as well as epidemiological research. Ooh, I got through that word all right. And it's just extremely rare. That's all I gotta say about that. All right, so the next group, and again, it's difficult. I can't just say, okay, well, just athletic people. 1 in 133,000, done, okay? It doesn't work like that. You have to be able to break it up between different subgroups, so subsections. So if we're talking about healthy adults, we're actually talking about much larger prevalence of death during exercise. That said, this could be due to a variety of conditions, but what the research looked at was healthy adults. So what could that mean? Well, again, you'd have to know the parameters for what healthy adult means. Is that healthy within a certain range for cardiovascular disease? If you're talking about healthy as in they don't have any signs of cardiovascular disease, they're asymptomatic, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have cardiovascular disease. That just means that they're not showing any symptoms. There's a lot of different variables that you have to work through. So for healthy adults, it's 1 in 18,000. So, I mean, yeah, the chances are still extremely low, but are they as low as a person who's highly fit and continuously working out and pushing their body continuously? No, certainly not. If you're constantly going after it and constantly exercising, then you're going to have a lower prevalence of death outside of exercise as well as within exercise. And we're going to talk about exceptions to that again in the next section. Now, and finally, I did want to talk about casual exercisers, as well as intensity of exercise. It's difficult, again, to cover every single one of those subgroups, but when we're talking about casual exercises, we are talking about people that work out maybe once or twice a week. Like they just kind of casually go to the gym. Hey, I'm gonna hit the gym, bro. Or I need to go do my cardio for the week. Not for the day, but for the week. People that just casually go every once in a while, and their chance of dying during exercise is 1 in 82,000. Now again, that number is inclusive of men and women. Of course, women have a far lower prevalence of death during exercise than men do, but again, just because we're saying it's far lower does not mean that men are like, there's a 50% chance you'll die. No, it's nothing like that. I just want to hammer that through. I know this video is kind of weird because I'm discussing death during exercise. I just want to make sure that you're not freaking out here, okay? All right, so, and another thing is, it's also about premenopausal women. Postmenopausal women, the risk certainly increases, maybe not quite as much as men, but it certainly closes that gap quite a bit. So that's another thing to consider. So when we're talking about casual exercisers, this was non-discriminatory. So the study that looked at this was looking at gym goers. It wasn't controlled, and so we can't really 100% say, oh yes, this is always the case. Also, they could have measured a lot more people that were in their 70s, for example, or they could have measured a lot of people that were, 45 and had cardiovascular disease or smoked a lot. Like, there's just a lot of different variables to control for, and those are the kinds of things that you'd want to do in a controlled study. But that number kind of throws out at least a number that we can actually go forth with this video and have an idea that no matter if you're on one range of the health spectrum or on an extreme range of the health spectrum where you're healthy but you don't necessarily exercise, or you're healthy and yes, you exercise every day and you're into it and you track your nutrition, all that, you're going to have a much lower chance of death during exercise as opposed to a person who is healthy, yes, but they don't necessarily exercise, so their body's not used to that sudden strain. And talking about sudden strain, actually intensity makes a huge impact actually on the prevalence of death as well. Increase in intensity does lead to a higher risk of having issues, and we'll cover those issues actually right now in the next section. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's explain a little bit about this cardio risk. Why certain people are higher, why certain people are lower, and I touched on this a little bit, but one thing I did mention, for example, is with athletes. Why would a person who is so fit, especially if they're young, let's say they're 22 years old, they've been exercising for, let's say, 6 years. Just throwing a number out there, which is perfectly possible. A person starts exercising heavily at the beginning of high school. They're involved in a lot of different sports. And then they go to college and maybe they do intramural sports, or they do collegiate sports, for example, or they go into professional. I mean, you've seen, there's certainly NBA players that have just dropped dead suddenly at the age of like 25, and it's just like some of those things are difficult. You just don't really understand what in the world happened. And in certain cases, yeah, you can focus on the case study and say, oh, well, he was on drugs or she was on drugs or whatever it was. But in certain cases, it actually comes down to genetics. And this is something that you would probably catch. In most cases, you would catch this, and that is a enlarged heart. So a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So an enlarged heart, as in the musculature, specifically the left ventricle of the heart muscle, enlarges to a point where you aren't able to get enough oxygen, enough blood, enough nutrients in general to the rest of the body in a high demand situation. So again, if we're talking about an athlete, you are going to have that intense exercise, or at least that high duration exercise. And in certain cases, it's going to be kind of an adaptation between those two, intensity and duration. So in those cases, yes, a genetic disorder like that myopathy can end up leading to death, and sudden death actually. So that's an example. Again, is it rare? Yes, it is. And if you do have it, then you most likely already know about it. So usually you see signs when you're younger. You actually see a person kind of running out of breath, like they shouldn't be out of breath, but for some reason they are out of breath. And it's a condition that usually gets caught. So that's one example. Other examples, however, are age. So the older you are does not necessarily mean that you're just going to drop dead. No, exercise in general is quite healthy for you, and that's true for really anyone, but that does not mean that age is completely devoid of risk. Being older and getting older and older, that does mean that your body's more susceptible to, depending on how you take care of it, of course, is more susceptible to things like cardiovascular disease risk, as well as a host of other diseases. And those aren't necessarily things that you catch on a daily basis. Some of those diseases, what I'm trying to say is they're chronic, so they just kind of happen over time, and it's just an effect of age. Okay, so if you suddenly start exercising and you're in your 50s and you haven't checked on your cholesterol, you haven't checked on things that are related to that cardiovascular system, that cardiopulmonary system, then yes, it is possible that you might be putting an overdue strain on your body, and then you end up having issues. On another note, of course, and we're talking about casual gym goers in the last section, the reason why that might be an issue actually is because if you go to the gym and you work out once or twice, that's an infrequent exercise cycle. You would not be considered, at least according to the American College of Sports Medicine, who I'm certified through, and probably through a lot of other medical agencies, you'd probably end up finding out that if a person works out 1 to 2 times a week, they would not be considered a continuous exerciser. They don't fall under that criteria of being highly physically active. That being the case, an infrequent exercise would fall under the generally sedentary label, if you will. And again, that being the case, if you increase intensity, like I mentioned earlier, intensity can certainly drive up that risk. If you're completely healthy and you drive up intensity, you'll probably be fine. Don't worry, again. But if you have cardiovascular disease risk, let's say if you've been smoking, or if you have hyperlipidemia, or, well, an increase in your lipid profiles, or you just have a terrible nutrition in general, then it's probably prudent to go check out with your doctor just to make sure that you're okay, just to make sure, at least get a general checkup so that you know that your body is functioning at least relatively healthy to a point where you can increase that intensity to a level that you might want. That said, yes, intensity can have a detrimental impact when it comes to people who think that they're healthy or are asymptomatic, don't show symptoms, but suffer from at least mild, maybe moderate, or even in certain cases heavy cardiovascular disease. So those are a few explanations as to why aerobic exercise could lead to death. And the second half of this is obviously strength training or strength exercise. Well, really high intensity exercise in general, and that can come from weightlifting, it can come from body weight training, really anything that's going to be kind of short duration, high bursts of energy that are necessary and you do wear out quite quickly. High intensity interval training is another example. There isn't very much data on this, as opposed to aerobic exercise where there is quite a bit of data on the prevalence of mortality during exercise. When it comes to strength training or strength exercise, resistance exercise, however you want to label it, the data is slim to none. There's actually only 1 or 2 studies that I was able to actually find on this subject, but that said, there is a study that specifically looked exactly at this subject on the risk of death from strength training. And it came to some interesting conclusions. Of course, everything that I'm going to mention does need far more research on the subject because, let's face it, one study is a great start, and that's definitely where we should be beginning to garner our information, but we do need far more research to really hammer home and make sure that we get the correct information. And that's where science is so wonderful. It's constantly adapting, but we do set the foundation with those first few studies. Okay, anyways, let's go on. In terms of strength training, there was a study that was performed that looked at 1 rep maxes on over 6,000 people, ages early 20s all the way up to I think late 60s or 70s, early 70s. So that's a huge range in age. And you'd think that with over 6,000 people tested on 1 rep maxes on 2 different exercises, actually leg press and bench press, that you would see some sort of risk, see some sort of issues, because I think these people were hooked up to EKGs to check their hearts, to check their cardiovascular system, how it's functioning and all that, and they found 0 issues, 0 potential problems with all of these people. All of these people, of course, pre-screened as well, so that does not necessarily mean that an unhealthy person, a person who is asymptomatic, again, in cardiovascular disease, couldn't have issues. You certainly could, but in terms of if you are healthy, if you are generally healthy, then the risk is, well, kind of undetermined, in all honesty. If there were 0 cases in this study, we would again need more studies to really pinpoint roughly a percentage to attribute to the risk of strength training. However, what we can say is, at least based on this preliminary study, as well as one other study that I'll discuss in a second, the percentage is below 0.015%. So it is below 0.015% chance that you will die if you are healthy and you are within that age range. Again, more studies need to be done to substantiate that and to actually figure out the exact percentage, but that's a good, just for the fun of it, just for this video, that's a good place to start. Now, another study was actually done with over 20,000 tests, 20,000 1 rep max tests, 4,500 people that performed 20,000 1 rep max tests. There were again 0 issues. So can we really again attribute a specific percentage? No, but that percentage that I mentioned earlier, that is a good starting point, and it is somewhere below that most likely. So the chances are extremely low that you will die from any sort of strength training problem, or at least health issue. I should limit this to health issues, because That does not necessarily, I did not look at, for example, having injuries or death from misuse or unracking the weights and it slipping, or like dying because the weight falls on your neck or something during bench press or whatever it is. Like I did not look at that. I just looked, this is all just physiological reasoning, just an understanding of how weight training or resistance exercise affects physiology in general. So some of the explanations for why there were no deaths or no health complications when it came to these 1 to 2 studies that I mentioned that did actually look into this is because there's just 1 to 2 studies, okay? That's certainly a big deal, even though the sample size was huge. I mean, thousands of people, and the age range was fantastic. That's also great. They were also pre-screened as far as I know. So if you pre-screen people, then you're going to have some idea of their risk of mortality right there if they go through with the entire protocol. So that said, you know that these people are at least going to be relatively healthy. So again, I guess I should say that this video is kind of more indicative of people that are healthy as opposed to people that do have cardiovascular disease risk. And maybe I'll do an article on exactly on people that are pathological, have issues, health issues, and what their risk is. But in terms of healthy individuals, it seems that the risk is extremely low. That said, that's probably why that percentage is so low that we're able to determine, at least from these few studies. Now, another aspect is the fact that in these studies, they supposedly never use the Valsalva maneuver. And the Valsalva maneuver is being able to create pressure, intra-abdominal pressure during, for example, like a squat or even a leg press. You might have a little bit of it, or a deadlift. Things that are going to be able to brace your core. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term, but bracing your core, tightening those abs, pushing pressure into your abs, pushing your abs up against a belt, for example, or even if you don't use a belt, just being able to brace those abs so that you're able to then pull or push at maximal intensity. And there have been studies that have looked at what intensity a person needs to use a Valsalva maneuver to actually garner the most maximal amount of power out of their body. Which makes sense, because a Valsalva maneuver is extremely important when it comes to getting that maximal amount. I'll bet you almost no powerlifter on the planet, at least an elite powerlifter, there's no way that they would go under like an 800-pound squat without doing a Valsalva maneuver. Their body would just break because if you're not bracing your abs and getting that pressure in there to resist and hold that weight there, you're gonna have a tough time, son. You're gonna die. So these studies apparently did not use a Valsalva maneuver, although there are other studies that say that there's at 80% intensity, it is necessary to use a Valsalva maneuver to truly get that 80% or higher intensity. So I'm questioning if these studies really got a true 1 rep maximum if they instructed these people not to do a Valsalva. And I think that's a legitimate claim. And I genuinely believe that it is possible that these people, while they did lift close to their maximum, I don't necessarily believe that they lifted at maximum. And then that brings up questions of, well, in that case, if they did lift at maximum, would their mortality risk increase? And I do think that it might increase a little bit. Would it make a massive difference? Probably not. But the Valsalva maneuver does increase your blood pressure, and there's some debate over how dangerous it is and if we should be doing it and things like that. And I'm sure I'll cover that in another video, but that's beside the point on this. That said, if we assume that the Valsalva maneuver does increase blood pressure, even in healthy individuals, it is possible that it could end up sending a few people over that edge where they are in some sort of danger. Physiologically, their health is in danger to the point where their mortality risk increases. So that's something I just wanted to throw in there, because I do think that it's really important to be open and read that research and be able to interpret where there might be a few issues with it, and just go ahead and throw that in the video. And of course, if you want to read more about that, it's in the article as well. I do mention a little more on the specifics of it all. This is the summary of the video for those of you that need a quick recap. If not, please subscribe and check out the attached article. And in summary, for those of you that do not want to go through the entire video, or you just want a quick recap, well, what did we talk about? We talked about the mortality of aerobic exercises or cardiovascular exercise. If you go running, jogging, do any sort of long-standing type of exercise, in which case, if you are highly fit or if you're an athlete, then your chances are extremely low of dying from exercise or during exercise. Those rates would be about 1 in 133,000 for men and about 1 in over 760,000 for women. And the reasoning for that is because women tend to have far more protective agents like hormones, estrogen, talking about all kinds of different things. They're less prone to cardiovascular disease, and of course this is assuming that we are talking about premenopausal women. That gap certainly shrinks once you get to postmenopausal women, but usually most athletes or highly active people will be younger, although I mean, granted, a person can certainly be of an older age and be quite active as well, and those benefits would, at least in part, be seen in those people as well. Now, in terms of casual exercises, there is an increased risk, but that risk is also still quite low, with a 1 in 82,000 rate of death in people that go to the gym or exercise only once to 2 times a week, so kind of infrequently. And of course, risk can also increase depending on the intensity, your general health, if you're prone to cardiovascular disease, all kinds of different areas. Now, in terms of strength training or some sort of strength exercise, it could be body weight as well, or it can be high intensity interval training. In that case, the risk is actually, it's difficult to determine because the studies that have been done on those subjects have been rather scarce. There's only 1 to 2 studies that have really looked at this, and among those studies there have been no actual incidents of any sort of life-threatening or fatal injuries or any sort of physiological issues, with studies from 4,500 all the way up to over 6,000 subjects and over 20,000 maximal tests, maximal strength tests. There have been no issues, so we can at least, from this preliminary data, we would need more data, but from this preliminary data we can assume that there is a less than 0.0150% chance of actually dying from exercise due to strength training. Now again, there were limitations based off of the Valsalva maneuver that I did mention in the entirety of the video. Feel free to check that out. I do mention a few of the inconsistencies and things that might throw off those values. And of course, again, we are assuming that these are for healthy populations, and this is not necessarily true for people that have any level of cardiovascular disease risk or other general health risk. And with that said, if you found the information useful, please subscribe. It certainly means quite a bit to me when I see that subscriber number increase. And that's that. Of course, share and like the video if you can, or if you feel like it. No pressure or anything. Alright, well, that's that. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Stay focused. See ya.